Okay, welcome back to our summer podcast series where we've been talking with our small group leaders for fall 2020. And this week I have with me Mollie-Pierce and Eva. Welcome, guys. How you doing?
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Well, first off, tell me a highlight from your summer. What's one thing that you've done or been doing that's been most enjoyable to you?
You can go, Mollie-Pierce.
Um, well, I've been to the beach and that's been really fun. Kind of nice to get away from all the craziness of like the virus and like be somewhere that's not at home and just kind of relax, which has been really fun. And not having school has been really nice. And I started working at a dental clinic and I love it because I'm sterilizing everything. So I feel very safe and it's like all very clean. Um, so it's been a really good summer so far.
Awesome.
Yeah, for me, I've also taken a couple trips to the beach, which has been really nice just to relax and sit out by the ocean, especially watching the sunrise in the morning. That's one of my favorite things about the beach. I got a job at Chick-fil-A, and it's my first job ever, and it has been so much fun. Just getting to meet people through the drive-through and getting to meet people at work has been really nice.
Cool. That's awesome. All right. Well, we're getting closer and closer to students moving back to campus and specifically thinking about freshmen coming in. I would love to hear about y'all's transition to college. What was that, those first couple weeks like as you prepared to leave home, as you moved in, as you got settled in? Yeah. Tell me a little bit about that transition for you.
Eva, you can go.
It was a pretty big transition for me going to such a big school in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, because I grew up in a small town called Cliffside, North Carolina, population like 600 people. So it was a pretty big transition, and I was worried about how well I would do with it. But I was just thrown in, and it kind of just all happened at once. And I don't remember ever feeling like I didn't belong or feeling like it was too big. And I really enjoyed it. I remember moving in, my grandparents came with me, my mom, my sister. And I moved in early because of Carolina Way Camp. So it was kind of easier that way because there wasn't a lot of people. It was hot trying to move everything. I was on the ninth floor of Hinton James. So that was kind of an experience having to move everything in. But it was easier than I thought, so I was thankful for that. Just any advice I would give, I guess, is to bring a lot of big bags to carry stuff in. Make sure you bring a lot of people. I don't know if that's really going to be the case this year. You might only get to have a couple people with you, but yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I think moving's going to
Right.
be not very fun this year. When I moved into college, like literally you pulled up to the curb, opened your car, and there was like 15 people that just unloaded your car and took it to the room. It took 5 minutes. And this year I'm like, it's probably going to be you and your parents. So have fun. Yeah, Mollie-Pierce, what about you? What was that transition to college like?
Well, I live in Raleigh, which is not very far from Chapel Hill. It's like 45 minutes max. So I never felt like I was really saying goodbye to home like some people who live farther away. So that was kind of nice and convenient because when my parents were like saying bye at Carolina Way Camp, I was like, well, I'll see you like in a few days. Like that's not a big deal. So I don't think the leaving home transition was as big for me as it was for some people, just because the proximity. But definitely the class sizes was a huge transition for me. My graduating class from high school was 30 people. So that was like a huge transition to go from 400 people from my K through 12th grade like school to like that's my entire biology class. So that was a little wild. Moving in was pretty smooth since I was only on the fourth floor of E-House. But I really enjoyed um, living in a suite. I was a little skeptical of living with so many other girls because I'd never shared a room with anyone before. And I have a brother, so, you know, it's very different living with a brother rather than like 7 other girls, but I really, really loved it. I loved having a roommate. Now I'm really sad that I don't have a roommate like at my house because I really liked having someone to just talk to like last thing in the evening and then first thing in the morning. That was always really fun. And always having someone to like walk to dinner with was really, really fun. I really loved my first year at UNC. I was also kind of scared coming in because a lot of people were like, UNC is very liberal, like you're gonna struggle a lot keeping your faith, and I found that not to be the case at all, which was really reassuring. Even though I interacted with a lot of people who didn't have the same beliefs as me, I really enjoyed those conversations with people and like becoming better friends with them and seeing where they're coming from and kind of understanding that. So I was really thankful for like a first year of like, it was very smooth until, spring break and everything kind of went awry, but it was a really good first year.
Yeah, for sure. That's great. Well, tell me a little bit about, starting to hear from freshmen who are coming in, and the idea of like shopping for campus ministry and church is starting to come up. So I would love to just hear from y'all's perspective. What was that process like of kind of exploring, and how did you kind of settle on InterVarsity as a place where you wanted to invest?
Coming into Carolina, I did not think there would be a lot of options for ministry. I kind of thought, well, there will be one good one, and that's what I'll do. But then Carolina Way Camp came, and we had, speakers from each ministry come in, and I remember feeling so overwhelmed by the different options here that they had on campus. And then the first couple of weeks, you'll go to all the different events that they have and kind of introduction things. And that will probably feel pretty overwhelming because they all seem great and you just want to be able to do all of them. And I remember trying to narrow it down. And the way I kind of did it was my mom had been involved in InterVarsity at UNC Charlotte. And I remember thinking, well, she liked it, so I'll probably like it. And this is the one I'll try for a while. And I ended up loving it. The people in InterVarsity aligned really well with my personality. And I think that that's what really helped me to realize that InterVarsity was what's for me. But when you do come to UNC, don't get discouraged by how overwhelmed you feel by the ministries. But just kind of take it one step at a time. You don't have to go to all the introduction things that people have, all the events. Pick a few. Just see what feels best and where you feel the most at home. And I think that's kind of the best way to figure out what ministry to be involved with.
Yeah, I like that advice. I think for like when you feel overwhelmed, it's because all of us want you to find a place where you fit and where you can kind of like grow and feel like you belong. But we're not competing with each other. Like, we kind of believe in the other ministries. We think they're doing great stuff. And if another ministry is the right fit, like, we're going to be like, great, that's wonderful. So don't feel like you're being competed over. Like, people are trying to welcome you to campus. So yeah, that's great advice. Mollie-Pierce, what about you? What was that process like?
So coming in, I kind of felt like I already knew which church I was going to go to, since I had some older peers who already went to Chapel Hill and had found a church there. And I was like, that's an easy way for me to get a ride. So I know a lot of people were like concerned coming in to find a church, which thankfully was not really my situation. But finding a campus ministry, I was a little worried about, because I didn't want to get kind of lost in the crowd. In like a big campus ministry, but I also like had only heard of the big ones. So there was kind of this like, I don't really know what's available. And then at Carolina Way Camp, when we're moving in, because you move in a few days earlier, I met several people who were in InterVarsity. One of them happens to be my own small group leader, Amy Grace, and she helped me move in. And I just like, she's so cool. Like, I want to get to know her more. Like, she seems so nice and friendly. And so at Carolina Way Camp, I talked to her more. I was like, what campus ministries are you involved with? Like, can you tell me about that? So I think a piece of advice I would give incoming freshmen would be like, if you think someone's really cool and you would enjoy spending time with them, like find out what they're interested in and like go participate in some of those things. If you don't like it, like no hard feelings from anyone, but like if you think that person's cool and you would enjoy spending time with them, then you'll probably enjoy spending time with their friends too. And like it builds a nice community. Another thing I really liked about InterVarsity was the community. It felt very similar to what I'd experienced in high school because it is kind of smaller. And so you have those really tight-knit groups as part of a larger group of like all of the grades, ages. And so it's like little, individual family units of like your own small group and then like a big community of all the small groups together, which I really love. And I think is super unique. So.
Yeah, awesome. So kind of knowing that this semester is going to be necessarily different with restrictions on how we're allowed to gather and how many people, I think plugging into a small group is going to be really, really important. So what were the steps that you guys took to feel really plugged in, whether you did that right away or whether it took you a while to kind of figure out, oh, I should probably do this, and kind of how would you pass that knowledge along to incoming students?
Well, I think since I only kind of involved myself with InterVarsity, it was kind of easier for me to be like, yeah, this is what I'm going to do and just kind of full commit. It was obviously much harder when we switched to online. But I think definitely while we were like on campus, I was trying to be there as frequently as I could, as long as there were no like academic, interferences. Like if I had an exam on a small group night, I would try to finish my exam earlier. But that wouldn't always happen. So, but all the nights that I could come, I would try to make it, especially to the dinners beforehand, because you can kind of just talk and catch up with people. And I think that's really important as well. Like try to make the dinners. If you can't make the small group, try to at least make one of them because that's where you build community.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I mean, I'll probably say it in a talk or 18 before this next year's over, but community is not built on convenience. It requires effort and intentionality. And so if you're not prioritizing that small group meeting to be there, to be invested in the community, and then, you're probably going to look back in 8 weeks and wonder why you don't feel very connected. You have to make choices to feel connected. So I think that's really good advice. Eva, what about you?
For me, I think it took me a while to really develop deep relationships with people in the small group. And I think this was because I was scared to be vulnerable with people and scared of those deep kind of uncomfortable conversations that I think are really necessary and important in life. But what really kind of sent me into that is knowing that those deep conversations are what sent me into those deep friendships with people. And when I really got to feel known was something that was really comforting. But it did take effort. Like you said, it takes stepping out and texting someone, hey, do you have lunch plans? Or, hey, what are you doing today? And that's what the group chat will be really helpful for, is sending a text every once in a while, like, hey, I'm in the library studying. Does anybody want to join? And then most likely someone will respond and say, hey, I'm here. Yeah, we can meet and hang out, that kind of thing. And that's really helpful in getting closer with people in your small group. And then like Mollie-Pierce said, eating dinner together, grabbing lunch, even breakfast. Mollie-Pierce and I did that a few times, got coffee and had some really good conversations, sharing a meal with each other. So I highly recommend sharing meals with others.
Yeah, you might have to get it to go with takeout and eat outside, or make a little breakfast club in the lobby of your dorm, with 2 or 3 friends, something like that. There's going to be options, but yeah, it's going to require us to be intentional for sure this semester. You guys both Mollie-Pierce, you mentioned, and Eva, I know that you also are involved at a church. There's campus ministry and church when coming to college, and a lot of Christian students are kind of looking to plug into both, which we highly encourage. Why don't you guys share with us a about your experience of why doing campus ministry and church has been really helpful. And yeah, no necessarily advice for people, just why do you think that they're both really good and helpful things to be involved with at college?
One thing about being a freshman is that you don't get to have your car on campus. So kind of your first year, you're relying on people to take you to church and drive you to church, which in a way it limits your options. But there are so many different people that go to different churches that are more than willing to take you to visit. And I go to the Summit Church, which the pastor is J.D. Greer, and there are lots of different campuses. I go to the Chapel Hill campus. And what's cool about the Summit Church is that although I'm involved with InterVarsity at school, a lot of different students go to Summit that are involved with lots of different campus ministries. So it's cool to be in a room with people worshiping, not just people from InterVarsity, but people from, all over campus. And that's been really cool. And to make friends that way and to see different people, it's just really nice.
Yeah.
So, I go to Chapel Hill Bible Church, which I kind of chose based on the people that I knew had cars, and I knew I could get a ride there. So that was more kind of like convenience, rather than like me church hunting, if you will. But I really fell in love with it. I wish something that I just like, hindsight's 2020, but like looking back, I'm like, I wish I really was more involved with my church, especially the small groups that are outside of, just college collective and whatnot, because that's where you build more relationships within, those within your college class. And so this small groups, at least at Chapel Hill Bible Church, are all ages and like co-ed. So I think that's unique and different than what we have at InterVarsity. So I wish I had gotten involved in that as well. I just didn't make that a priority my first year because I was trying to get really involved in my InterVarsity small group. But I think if you can get really involved in your church, whatever they have to offer, as well as your campus ministry, I think they really pair nicely together. I know there's a lot of people from InterVarsity that go to Chapel Hill Bible Church, but there's also a lot of people who are in different campus ministries that also do the small groups. So I think you get a lot of good, interesting perspectives when you go and get involved in the church.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's a lot of theological reasons of why you should be involved with church, and if you're interested in that, you come talk to me, and we'll point you in the direction of a church. But I think from the perspective of kind of what do you get from the two experiences, campus ministry is with people that you're going to be on campus with like every day. So a lot of your really close and intimate like friendships will a lot of times come from your campus ministry, not necessarily, but we can't offer you intergenerational community. We don't have, I'm the old person at InterVarsity and I work for InterVarsity. Everyone else is a college student. And so, yeah. And then also like things like the sacraments, like communion and baptism and things like that. We don't do that. Campus ministry doesn't do that. And the church really is a place that we should be going to interact with those sacraments. Obviously, all of this is said with the caveat of we assume your churches will meet together at some point in the fall, but who really knows? So yeah, we're hopeful for that. Cool. Well, I'd love to hear just from you guys personally, a couple things about your year last year. Would love to hear like one highlight. So something that you just look back with really fond memories of like, this was so much fun. And then I would also love to hear the thing that most challenged you or that you learned the most about. I think that this year for all of us has been a year of real growth and learning and it kind of growing in our own understanding of things in the world. So would love to hear from you guys what were some of those things. So highlight and then area of biggest growth or learning for you.
Eva, do you want to go first?
Yes, I can go. I have a couple of highlights, I think, specifically from small group. And this first one, I believe it was the second, third, it was very early on in my first semester at UNC. And we decided to go buy some cookie dough from Rams Market. And then a couple of girls did a meal swipe, got a to-go box, and literally filled the entire box up with soft serve ice cream. And then we made our way to a dorm, and I'm pretty sure it took us like 5 minutes to find a kitchen that was available. And then we decided to cook our cookie dough in a skillet pan, none of us really knowing how to do that. And it ended up with the cookie not really looking like a cookie, but we ate it anyways. Our ice cream was mostly melted at that point. We ate that too. And it was a really cool bonding experience. And even though our cookie did not turn out right, our ice cream was melted. It was still so much fun just to be with these girls and to laugh at our failures together. And that was such a good experience. And that's a moment that really stands out to me, as like us getting to know each other and us growing closer as a small group. And then the second highlight was at fall retreat, which we do. I guess, I don't know if we'll do it or not in the fall, depending on how things turn out. But I remember that only a few of the girls from our small group were able to attend the fall retreat. And I was bummed out about that, because I wanted all of us to be there. But it ended up being a really, really good experience for me. I remember there was one night at small group, we were sharing our stories and talking about things that we had struggled with in the past. And we were all, being very vulnerable in that moment, which is something that's not easy for me to do. But I had developed a real trust with the girls that I was with, and I was able to talk about things that were a part of my past that are really hard for me to talk about. And I remember feeling so just free in that moment to be able to say these things out loud, and for other people to know the things I've dealt with in my past, and for them to accept it, and for them to be encouraging to me about different things. And then something I've learned, there were a lot of things I think I learned at college. College, it's just a big learning experience, I think, is how I would sum it up. But the biggest thing I've learned, and this is something I think I've learned within the past couple of weeks, but I think things that I learned in college and experience I had led me to really understand what I've grasped in the past couple of weeks. And that's that God can really be glorified in the midst of suffering, which is something I've struggled with because I've never understood how that can be possible, and never really understood the purpose of such immense suffering. And my aunt, she suffered with ALS disease for the past 3.5 years, and last week she passed away from that disease. And she was very strong in her faith. And at the funeral, the pastor, what he did was he kind of used all of the emails they had exchanged to it's really just using her words for the message that he delivered at the sermon. And he talked about, she talked about how she was able to see God more through her suffering and really experience a deeper relationship with him. And that, I was just in awe by the words that I heard that day, and how really suffering is hard. It's a hard thing to go through, but we're able to see God in a way that we can't without going through those hard situations. And that's something that I'm more open to now. I think it's not easy for us to say, God, I'm open to suffering. I'm willing to go through hard things. But now that I've seen what it can do, and how people have changed through those things, I'm more open to it, if that makes sense. So that's one thing that I just wanted to share.
For sure. Yeah, that's great. It's very much biblically supported, what you're saying, but it takes a lot of us a long time to come to that realization. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. Mollie-Pierce?
I think some of my highlights are very similar to Eva's. Definitely the fall retreat with InterVarsity was so much fun. I really felt like I got to know some of the girls in our small group so much better, and I felt so much more comfortable, like telling them things that I've struggled with in the past and that I'm still struggling with now. And I felt safe doing that. I don't think I can say many times where I've told people that and felt safe about telling them that, just because, like, well, what if they could use this, like, to embarrass me later or whatever. I never had that fear with this group of girls, which I think is a really, relaxing and peaceful feeling to have. And I think that speaks to the community that InterVarsity builds. I just love that so much. I also loved the late nights with my suite mates before we would go on breaks. I know before fall break we would just hang out and do weird things, like do like weird challenges, like, okay, can we all, like, like the push-up or like chair challenge where you all are 4 people are sitting on chairs and then you remove the chairs. Like, we would do things like that, and we weren't very good at it, but it was still fun. And we would have like movie nights, and before we went on Christmas break we had a big Christmas party. So just like little moments with my suite mates are definitely highlights that I'll always remember. They're so much fun. And then really any time that we were with small group people or InterVarsity people, all our movie nights were really, really fun and memorable. So my advice, because I didn't follow this advice my first semester, would be, if there's something that's going to be fun with that really close-knit group of people, I think you should do it, because I think several times most everyone will tell you that I like to go to sleep very early. And so I think I kind of missed out on some things that I wish I hadn't. So going back, I wish I had just stayed up, an extra hour so I could spend time with those people and build closer relationships with them. So I started doing that second semester and loved it. So I'm going to continue to do that, which will be really good, especially for community building. And then something that I grew from, I love the Enneagram, and I am a 2, and so what I've learned about myself is when I stress, I go to an 8, which like tries to micromanage things, and I try to control things.
Well, not all of us, please.
Unhealthy characteristics of the 8 are what I go to. And so I really try to control things and micromanage things when I feel like everything else is out of control. So that's what I tried to do at some points in college, especially once, we had to switch to online classes and I was back home. I tried to, micromanage everything so that I felt like I was a little bit in control. And God quickly was like, you have no control, which is a very humbling experience and something that I don't really enjoy. I didn't enjoy the experience, but I'm thankful for the experience because since then, some other things have like fallen through for next semester and next year that aren't really ideal, but I'm not really that anxious about it, and I'm not trying to micromanage it as much because I'm trusting, like, okay, this is part of God's plan and he had this from the get-go, so I'm not really needing to worry about this because he has this under control, even though it's an unknown. That's kind of, that would have made me very anxious probably a month or so ago. I'm kind of like, okay, there's a plan for this. I can trust God through this.
Yeah. Awesome. So the 2 questions I've been closing out with have been, what advice would you give to an incoming freshman knowing what you know now? But you guys have given lots of advice already. So instead I'll ask, and then I know that you guys have a question that you want to have a discussion with me about, so we'll get to that too. But what disciplines have you found to be helpful, specifically spiritual disciplines, in your relationship with the Lord over the course of the last year?
Well, for me at college, it's kind of hard to find. Sometimes it seems like there's a lot of alone time, but for me, I felt like it was hard for me to find like time to just be quiet and like be completely alone and be in silence. We talked a lot about like trying to have 10 minutes of silence, which was very, very difficult for me, of just like sitting in God's presence. Um, I don't think I ever did it perfectly, but I really tried to, you know, I don't think I could do the full silence. I think I could, but it was very difficult for me. So I took up journaling, and writing out my prayers. And I think that really helped me a lot. And that's something that I took up in college. And I've tried to stay consistent about it through the summer. It hasn't been as consistent, but that's something that I took up and that I found really helpful because in college, things are just go, 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 go. And you don't really have time to just sit in God's presence, even though you kind of see him working everywhere. You're not just sitting and like enjoying his presence. So I think that's something that really helped me enjoy his presence and enjoy, talking to God and just kind of laying out my concerns, all my praises, just having it there, and having it written out so I could go back and look, is also helpful for me.
Yeah, great.
Before college, I didn't really have anyone in my life who was actively encouraging me to take part in spiritual disciplines. And that's something that I was very encouraged to do at college, not only by, Zane and other leaders, but by the way that my peers were living their lives. And I really struggled at first. I didn't have a set time that I was doing my devotional. I was just kind of doing it whenever I wanted to or whenever I felt like it, which did not turn out to be the best thing for me. And I talked with my small group leader a lot about it and what would be the best way for me to do things. And what ended up working out really well for me was waking up about 30 minutes early, which does not work for most people, but it was hard at first, but it ended up being really good for me. And just taking the time to read a chapter out of the Bible and writing down what I thought about it and what I felt about it, and even going through commentaries online and seeing what the cultural context of things and kind of just the context in general was really, really helpful for me. And then another thing that's been really helpful is the posture of my prayer time, and just kind of holding your hands out or getting on your knees is such a life-changing thing in the way that you pray. And it doesn't sound like it would be really, but when you do it, you understand and you feel just the difference in the way that your connection is with God when you pray. So those two things are really something that I encourage you to look into and to try out for yourself.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for sharing with me. Now I hear that you guys have a question that you want me to answer, and I'm happy to do that. I'm sure it's going to be an easy softball. So go ahead and pitch it to me. What do you guys want to talk about?
Yeah, this will be an easy question. No problem at all. Something that Mollie-Pierce and I have talked about a lot, and I think that a lot of women and young girls think about is what's our role in the church? What is it that we're supposed to do? And most of us, or a lot of people, might have grown up in a church where women aren't necessarily encouraged to do ministry. It kind of feels like you're stepping out of boundaries when you want to teach or you want to lead a Bible study. You kind of feel like your job is to teach the kids and, that's all. But we know that that's not the case, that women are, called to teach and called to share the gospel with people. So our question today is, what is the role of women in the church? What does the Bible say about it? And yeah.
Yeah, great. Well, that's a great question. And one that I'll answer with the caveat of InterVarsity is an interdenominational ministry. And there are different answers to this question depending on the denomination that you come from. And so if you disagree with what I think, you're still allowed and would be encouraged to come to InterVarsity. You don't need to agree with me about every single theological issue in order to come. I grew up in a church tradition that was different than yours in the sense of women were allowed to be pastors and teachers in the church that I grew up in. So growing up, I had two female pastors in my time in church from like 11 to 18. And then I work for InterVarsity, which also encourages women on staff. And so I have a lot of peers on staff who are women, and supervisors and things like that are also women. So I think that the role of women in the church should be to teach and to take on leadership roles, and to lead, and not just to lead women, but to lead men as well. There's some arguments against that that people would make from a biblical perspective, and I could break those down and share how I think you really need to understand the context in which those books are being written. I would suggest looking up things like the cult of Artemis and understanding the specific city in which those letters are addressed, specifically in the New Testament. The Bible in general tends to speak fair. It tends to talk about women in leadership and not just one place. So the book of Ruth, the book of Esther are both examples of books that are written that are centered on women. Deborah's one of the judges in the book of Judges. That's a woman. Jesus has lots of women who are close to him throughout his ministry, and he actually first reveals himself to them. And then even Paul in his letters writes and talks about women who are in leadership roles within the church. He writes them in his address to these women who are letting me know about the issues in the church and have leadership roles, things like that. So, I think beyond just like biblical evidence, I think what we lose when we never sit under women who teach and who have authority to teach is we lose an ability to really hear from women's voices and to see and to really know their experience, but to learn from them. So for example, a couple of my friends who have been really influential women in my lives, two women who I was on staff with who are both Black women, have shared recently on Facebook about how when they try to voice their concern over injustice or racism or systemic issues within the country, it's often painted as they're being angry or they're not being civil or their tone is wrong. And so we start to get into this place where we're really comfortable policing tone and telling women, hey, when you speak that way, we can't hear you, so you need to speak this way. And unfortunately, all that really is an attempt to kind of continue to have power in a situation. And as a white man, I have power in pretty much every situation that I step into. And so it becomes easy to be dismissive for this reason or that reason. And we actually fail to even just hear what's being said at all. And I think that's an issue. I also think it's an issue in the sense of we have a hard time believing women culturally, like especially on a college campus. Sexual assault and just assault and violence it's so much more prevalent than you can imagine. And I don't mean that to scare you or anything like that, but statistics said it's like 1 in 4. And I've been doing campus ministry for 8 years, and I can tell you that I think that's absolutely true. And yet, how many of those cases are reported? How often are people just basically told, well, it was your fault, you put yourself in that situation, whatever the case might be? I don't think that's a healthy place for us to operate as a society. I especially don't think it's a healthy place for us to operate as Christians. When we stop hearing the voices of people who are in pain and who are struggling, we've lost the heartbeat of God. Like one of the most consistent things that you hear about God in the Old Testament is that he hears the cry of the oppressed. In Hebrew, it's called the Zedekah, that God always hears the Zedekah. And a lot of the times the people that he chooses to partner with because they too hear that cry. When we lose that as Christians, when we lose the ability to hear pain and the pain of others, I'm concerned about what that says about where we are with the Lord. So again, different denominations believe different things. And specifically from a campus ministry perspective, we're not ordaining people. Like, we're not talking about pastoral roles. So that doesn't really come into play for us. So like when I have a woman come and teach a large group, that doesn't come up. I would still believe the same things that I do if it did, but from our perspective, that's not something that we wrestle with. That would be kind of a baseline answer, but would be happy to kind of answer any other questions, and maybe even more specifically about kind of like y'all's role, if you have questions about that.
Thank you. That's a much better answer than I've ever been given.
Yes, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, my thing is, I love and trust you guys a lot, and I've appointed you to be leaders of small groups and Bible studies, because I think that you have a perspective that should be shared and that can really help to shape and mold other people's understanding, but also your own. And so I hope that that's felt amongst our students, that like, yeah, we trust you. We want you to do this. And so, yeah, for sure. Cool. Again, you don't have to agree with me. We're an interdenominational ministry. This is not a point of like, if you don't believe this, then you're out. Like that's not how it's going to work. But you asked for my opinion, and that's my perspective. And I'm confident that I could support that from a biblical perspective as well. For the sake of time, I won't do it on this podcast, but anyone who wanted to come and have a conversation like that with me about a biblical basis for it, I'd be happy to have that conversation. Cool. Great. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me today on this podcast. I'm excited for people to see it. The buzz is in the air a little bit. A lot of freshmen who are planning to come to campus are starting to get excited, and so I'm can't wait for you guys to meet them and to get your small group off the ground. So thank you all so much. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.